All right, I see that we are streaming live, and I want to just say a happy new year to everybody who is tuning in, whether it's live or later. This is our first NBC Sunday Series webinar for 2023, and also welcome Megan, who is one of the newest employees at survivingbreastcancer.org, who's helping us today. Thank you, Megan. So this series was born from a conversation that I had with a dear friend who has passed, all about how there are things that are central to the metastatic breast cancer experience that nobody's talking about. There's all kinds of discussion out there about cancer, about living with cancer, about living beyond cancer, about living after cancer. But the experience of living with cancer for the rest of our lives and how that affects us as individuals and our families is something that wasn't being discussed as much. Now, of course, there's a whole lot of other people in this space now, our friends over at Our NBC Life. We love listening to their offerings as well. But our series is meant to be those informal conversations you would have with a trusted friend here at our Sunday series. And so I wanted to start the year off talking about what may seem like to be a pretty heavy subject, and that is what happens with our families after we have passed. We lost quite a few really important people to me personally at the end of 2022, and watching the community navigate that, right? As we're all connecting with each other, in the limited ways that people have as they are declining, as well as interfacing with their families. And so when a friend of mine, Jen, brought up a new initiative that she is involved with, I thought that was a really great way to start out the year. Not thinking about this as a downer, but more as a, how do we prepare not only ourselves for that transition, but how do we prepare our families for that transition? And throughout the time today, I'll probably throw in some examples of some of the things that people did or didn't do in some of those recent experiences with people who have passed. But I really look at this as being our way to show our love to our families. I often tell people when both of my grandfathers passed, one funeral was completely paid for, completely planned. My grandmother just showed up. My other grandfather, he had like accounts at like 9 different banks or something, child of the Depression, right? And nothing was planned. In fact, the paperwork was like behind the filing cabinet. It took them a while to find it. And so my own experiences watching my grandmothers navigate that has informed my own perspective on things. And certainly if anybody is interested, we have a whole bunch of different webinars on financial, estate planning, death doulas, all kinds of different things that you can think about for end of life if you just do a search on the survivingbreastcancer.org website or look at the podcast as well. So again, showing love to our families, doing things that we can in order to make that transition easier, I believe is something that we're all probably thinking about to some extent. It's just, do we take the extra effort to do something? And so that's my challenge, my New Year's challenge to all of you, is to look forward. And if the end of your life is part of something that you are looking forward to, not in an anticipatory way, but just, this is coming, to think about one thing that you could do in order to leave your legacy or leave information or however you look at that for the people around you. So be thinking about that, because I'm going to ask about that here at the end of our time today. But what I'd love to do now is have our guests introduce themselves. And Jen, since you're next to me in our Brady Bunch square here, I will call on you first. Not a stranger to this program.
That's right. I am not a stranger to this program because my late husband, Bob Limberg, who was a hospice and palliative care physician, was diagnosed with a metastatic renal cell, clear cell carcinoma, and lived for 22 months following the diagnosis. It was very clear from the start that he would die of the diagnosis or a complication from one of the treatments. And we had some advantages that in so much as he was a palliative care and hospice physician, and I had already lost a number of family members prior. So he had sort of the professional side of things, and I had the personal side of things. And so we had already been really open about our end of life wishes before he got sick. Some really intimate moments in our time together, which we can talk about another day. But we'd already talked about that, and so when he got sick, I will admit that those conversations got more difficult. No question about it, and we thoroughly prepared, a lot thanks to him. I was thinking the other day, because I'm coming up on the 6-year anniversary of his death, and
Oh, wow.
yeah, I know. And about, I would say, 4 to 6 weeks before he died, he made an appointment for us up at the VA's HR office. He had worked for the VA. This is just an example. He had worked for the VA for a long time, and we went there to sign me up for all of my survivor benefits. And it was an incredible gift, and I am thankful to him for doing it almost daily, not quite daily, but certainly every time I schedule a doctor's appointment, once a month when I get a check, and all those sorts of things. I could have done it by myself, but I didn't have to. And then in addition, it became a very cherished memory of something we did together. So anyway, and then I allowed my very private art journal about the saddest time in my life to be published as a book, which has been very well received. And then most recently, so my focus has been on the family caregiver, the role of the family caregiver, the role of really open discussion and thorough open preparation for end of life. And then most recently, the sort of griever side of thing, and the importance of the sense of community for widowed people has become a huge part of my life. As I was introduced to Soaring Spirits International, and then became a part of that organization by serving on their board. So, and I know we're going to talk a lot about Soaring Spirits, and I'm really thrilled to help introduce them to your folks, Abigail. So that's what I got so far.
Thank you. And for those of you who don't know, it's the Hospice Doctor's Widow is the name of the art journal that Jen allowed to be published, and you can find it on Amazon. Or is there elsewhere, Jen, that you would like people to look at for it?
Sure, you could. The publisher through my website is probably at Alia Press. Is a little bit more direct and beneficial for the smaller business and the, say, author. But I don't care. I honestly, wherever you need to get it, get it. And if you want to just borrow it, that's fine too. You can go ask for it from your library, although I'm not sure they have it.
What is the name of your website?
My website is hospicedoctorswidow.com, and It's either spell out doctor or DRS.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. There's a wonderful page in there that I share a picture of it with lots of people. It was Jen's husband's list of how to make a decision about whether to go on another chemo or anher treatment. And I think that has been, it's just, it distills the decision making down into just the important foundational things. So
thank you.
I highly recommend that. So thank you, Jen, for being back and for being willing to share out of your story and out of your efforts. It's really helpful for people to see a person's experience, I think is very helpful. So Michelle, would love to turn to you next. Would love to have you introduce yourself.
Well, first of all, it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, Abigail. And I love Jennifer, and her book is amazing. And so I'm just delighted to be connected and to have an opportunity to share the work of Soaring Spirits with all of you. I came to widowhood a little differently. My husband was killed in a cycling accident 17 years ago. So it was a sudden experience for us, and I had the exact opposite experience of Jen in that we were completely unprepared for his death in every way you can think of. And so what that has led me to in terms of preparation is just the sense of importance. One, as you said, to help your family. Two, it occurred to me while you were talking about how clearly people who are living with breast cancer are aware of the potential of their time, the time of their death, right? They don't know, but they see death as a part of their life. But truly, that's a part of the human experience. We just never talk about it. And so in some ways, Phil's death has given me that gift, which is the ability to be able to speak about these really difficult things, which led a little bit later to me being able to help my parents and my dad through his death, which did include a cancer diagnosis and did include hospice and end of life that was preset because we were able to talk about those things. And so I just want to remind everyone that this conversation is important for every single person. It's just that we're not as eminently aware unless we've personally had an experience that has pointed to the need to prepare and the gift that that can be for the people around us. So I also wrote a book, and at the end of my book, it really is about my dad's death and how grateful I have been for the experience of living through my husband's death to prepare me to help my family through my dad's death. And so I really honor the need to have this conversation, but I also love that you're doing it and that your courage in stepping in. The work that we do at Soaring Spirits is focused on widowed people. After Phil's death, what I discovered was that there were a lot of people who loved me and wanted to support me, but none of them were widowed. And so nobody knew what to do with me. I was 35. I was parenting 6 kids. I had 3 stepkids. I had 3 of my own kids. And everybody was kind of like, well, I don't know if that's normal. And I was like, I don't know if what's fill in the blank is normal. I had asked my sister to buy me a safe so that I could put my husband's ashes in a safe because I was feeling so vulnerable. I was feeling like someone could pick him up and take him away. And I didn't know if that was normal. Nobody knew if it was normal. They bought me a safe because they were doing whatever I asked at that time in my life. So those are the kind of things that in a community of people who have experienced the death of their spouse or partner, you get the opportunity to talk about and to express the things that don't make any sense to you because you've never walked it before. And I can only imagine the number of things through breast cancer and a community around that must also be true. It's like I can say this to my people who know what I'm talking about and feel, one, a little more sane, or two, if I'm feeling completely crazy, at least I'm in good company.
And I would say that's probably the one thing that we talk about all the time in the community is that we can say one word and everybody completely understands what, or at least has a much better idea of what we're talking about than, having to explain it to healthy people. So that definitely resonates. But I do have a terminology question. You both said widowed people. Do we use widow and widower anymore? Is that the right nomenclature or is that gone?
The nice thing about using widowed people is that includes every person who's experienced the death of the person they thought they were going to spend their life with. And at Soaring Spirits, that's the definition for widowhood that we use. You will hear people say widow. You will hear people say widower. Really, actually, the widow is a generic term for a person who's experienced the death of their person. But we don't hear it that way. We also often think of women. And so when we say widow, people will assume that men or people who identify as male are not welcome in our programs. We like to make sure that we're as gender friendly as possible. So that's why we use widowed people.
Makes perfect sense. I was talking to somebody the other day and it was a spouse, a man who had lost his wife to MBC, and he referred to himself as a widow. And I mean, I didn't say anything, but I was taken aback. Like, wait a second, that doesn't sound right. You know, my English degree gets in the way sometimes.
It's funny though, because most people don't know that it is really intended not to be gendered. And so, but because of that, we've had to be very careful because there are more people who identify as female who experience the death of a spouse or partner first. And so because there are more of us, oftentimes people who identify as male are like, well, am I in? Is that for me too? And so we've worked really hard to keep trying to say everybody, everyone.
No, that's wonderful. And that happens a lot in the breast cancer community as well, since people don't always remember that men can get breast cancer.
Right.
And then the language is often exclusive. So that's wonderful. And I'm glad that you all are doing that. So let's just dive in, and either of you can take, however you want to explain, but what is Soaring Spirits, and why the name Soaring Spirit?
That's nice. Well, it's interesting because I didn't used to have a visual, but now that we're constantly on video, I can show you my, oh yeah, here we go. This is the visual. If you can, there it is.
A tattoo. Okay.
All right. Guys, there it is. Okay.
So the birds?
They're birds. Yeah. And when my husband died, I was hiking on a trail with my 6 kids thinking, what in the world am I doing? And how in the world are we going to ever survive this? And a huge hawk flew right over our heads and was like, to the point where I thought, oh my gosh, this hawk's going to dive bomb one of the kids. I almost felt like I was going to have to cover the kids up. But from that moment, like watching that hawk soar into the sky really just stuck with me. And so as I started walking through my widowed experience, I wanted to find other people. And what I kept coming back to was, what do we want though? Like, what do we want? And I wanted this kind of combination of soaring. We have the opportunity to soar in our life after the person that we weren't sure we could survive their death has died. And also they have the opportunity to soar in whatever is next for them. And so Soaring Spirits is this combination. The name implies the ability to soar for both us and for the people that we love so much and want the best for them in whatever's next in the next plane, whatever that looks like for each one of us, as it relates to what we believe. But the work of Soaring Spirits is really to help people rebuild their life after the death of a spouse or partner. And so when people come to us, they've already experienced the death of their person. They are in the midst of trying to discover how to support themselves, what to do next. And I mean that in every sense of the word. From, many people will come to us with some already things done, right? Those early days oftentimes are already completed. But they find themselves in a space of saying, what do I do with myself? How do I rediscover the desire to live? How do I process whatever trauma was associated with my person's death? How do I make I love that the Paige and Jen's book about making the decision about chemo, because it's also decision making as you move forward without your person, because you've had somebody to have as a sounding board. And so how do you continue? How do you make decisions when it's you, yourself, and you who are, the 3 people in your brain? And so really what we do is work to provide programs and resources that will help people to build a life for themselves that integrates the love they have for their person and allows space for whatever could be next. And I'd love to pass it to Jen, and she's experienced those programs from a variety of angles. So I'd love to hear, your take on that too, Jen.
Thanks. Yes, I'm eager to share. So I actually did not become a part of a widowed person's group right away. I was, I'm not sure I have a reason for that. I just didn't. And yet in these 6 years, I have researched and I have been approached by a number of them. I guess part of that is writing, again, letting your journal be published. And why I love Soaring Spirits so much is, well, several reasons. One is the inclusivity. So when Michelle says, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what gender you identify as. It doesn't matter what type of relationship you are in. Some widowed people's groups are just for women. Some will not let you become a member unless you are actually married to the person who died. If you were engaged, you are out of luck with those groups. If you were in a same-sex marriage with some of those groups, you are out of luck. So that first and foremost is what I love about Soaring Spirits, because death and grief are the great equalizers, right? I mean, that you just don't get any more equal than death and grief. We are all the same in death and grief. And so, or I should say we are all equal. I don't know that we're the same, but anyway, so I love when I went to my first Camp Widow that Michelle basically said, it doesn't matter. All that matters is that the person you were planning on spending the rest of your life with died. If that's the case, then you belong here. And so, you know, from that come two things there, well, three things, okay, maybe four, that I in particular. One is a newly widowed packet that Soaring Spirits makes available. Even with someone like me who was super prepared, I mean, really super prepared. And yet you feel alone and isolated and you just don't know which end is up. And even though I thought I was super prepared, you know, was I didn't get their packet when I first became a widow, but it probably would have helped me if I did. And it has helped other people I've known since who became a widow. The second thing is a newly widowed weekly, I think it's for 12 weeks, virtual sort of program that provides, when you've just lost your person, you just don't even know if you're going to get through the next hour. But if you know that you need to be someplace at your computer on Tuesday morning and a bunch of other people who lost their person are going to need to, it's such a powerful sense of belonging that you need. And so I love that program, and I have spoken for that program a couple of times. So that's another reason I love Soaring Spirits. I love them because they have a particular virtual meetup and a couple of events for LGBTQ widowed people. And this last one is a big part of what made me think of you, Abigail, and NBC is they have a bi-weekly virtual meetup for men who have lost their person, because men, widowers, by the traditional term or what we just talked about, approach this whole thing in a completely different way than women do, in my experience. And I have, it's not scientific. It is a sample size of just under 100, but it is true that men have different needs, and they need to be with other men who are in the same situation. They don't need necessarily to be with women who are in the same situation, because then there's all this weird pressure of, well, are we supposed to like get together? I mean, that's crazy, right? Like, but it's stuff that goes through your mind. And so they need time with other widowed men who have been in the status for a while and can provide some just sounding board and guidance and that sort of thing. And then they do have an event called Camp Widow several times a year in several different locations that is just phenomenal. And I was very worried about going because I was afraid I would cry the whole time. But I did. I went and I presented, and it is an there's just, as you have built, Abigail, with this program, right? There's something about being with the other people who are experiencing the same trial. I mean, there's just nothing that beats that when you're in one of these extraordinarily difficult situations. And within Camp Widow, there's an opportunity then to go to different tables where there are more seasoned widows, you know, who who lost their person in traumatic death, who lost their person to metastatic breast cancer, who lost their person to, all these different, because those are different scenarios. My entry into widowhood was completely different than Michelle's. And it is helpful to then drill down a little bit further and get closer to people that had a similar experience. You realize very quickly when you go to Camp Widow that comparative suffering is just baloney. It is just not, just like don't even bother, because it doesn't work. It really doesn't. Anyway, so these are the reasons that I'm thrilled to be a part of the organization, and why I really wanted to be sure that, I was interviewed by Lisa Laudico, and I think about Tony a lot.
Yeah. Well, Lisa was a huge loss to the NBC community.
Yeah.
I'm still amazed that she actually is gone. So
yeah.
Thank you for saying her name. As you know, it's so important to say the names of the people that we've lost, whether you're a part of their family or just a part of their adopted family, extended family.
Right.
So thank you for that. So I hear you talking about something in writing, a packet people can get, something that they can attend on a regular basis, especially in that onboarding or initial process. And then sounds like there are ways for people to give back after they've participated in the organization for a bit, to be able to mentor other people as they go through a similar situation. So are the offerings with Soaring Spirits all peer-to-peer, or are there other professionals that also, like Jen, that present or help as well?
That's a great question. So our focus is peer-to-peer, and what we do best is create a community. As Jen said, we drill down, and we also take a really broad perspective. And I think one of the most beautiful things about being in a community, to just give you a sense of it, at any Camp Widow, there's usually between 275 and 400 people. And so you get this really broad perspective on the widowed experience, whether or not it's exactly your experience. And so we love that opportunity. And our focus is peer-to-peer. That said, at every Camp Widow event, we have somewhere around 60 workshops. And those workshops are presented by a huge variety of professionals. So we have people who have degrees in everything you can imagine, as well as a widowed person who has done something unique, or, for example, hiked the PCH. We had a workshop about what that was like for her, how she felt in the midst of it, how she planned it, whether she thought it was a great idea for her grief. So we try to kind of give a really a broad opportunity for people to engage in light fare, in very instructive fare, in people who have written books, so that you have the opportunity to meet the author. The whole point is always to help people have access to tools that will assist them as they rebuild their lives. And when I say that, what I mean is, every time someone dies, our world is reshaped, and that reshaping can be really, really painful. And if we don't have a community of support around us to encourage us as we reshape, then sometimes what we reshape also causes pain, right? When we have buried our grief, or when we're not really able to engage with it in a healthy way, that just means that we're going to have to do it again as we continue to reshape. And so our hope is that, in the company of both professionals who have access to tools that they've created themselves or have studied extensively, and in the company of your fellow widowed people who may have very, very different experiences. Jen and I have very different experiences, and yet there are so many things that we have in common. And I think that's the other beautiful thing about Camp Widow, is you're going to meet people who are very similar to you, and you're going to meet people who you think, I would never have met you anywhere else except for here. And so the last thing I wanted to say in regards to the Camp Widow program, and then I'll address what you meant by these various steps that you can take, is just that oftentimes, and this is, I think, important for everyone, who wants to lead this as a resource to someone, or even give it as a resource now. Because my hope is that Soaring Spirits, what you learned today, is going to help you when your neighbor's person dies, when your someone family member dies, when anyone who has the experience of a partner death is around you. Soaring Spirits is available for them. And so my hope is that this is going to be helpful to everyone. But when you're giving when you're handing information about Soaring Spirits to someone, sometimes they're just not ready. And so, the fact that Jen did not get a newly widowed packet didn't mean that later, when she did engage with Soaring Spirits, that she didn't find it personally valuable. And so what we discover is that people often will go years, plural years, without getting any support, and then realize, like, okay, I don't know why, but I'm not feeling like I've got what I need to rebuild a life that's positive. And so then they come looking, and they it's almost like a backwards circle of like, oh wait, well, let me backtrack and see, oh, I see I didn't really get enough support, or maybe there's still some grief that I need to process. How do I do that? And so Soaring Spirits is available for anyone, no matter how long they've been widowed. Oftentimes our entrance to programming is our newly widowed programs, of which we are super proud and we love. And I think in some ways our superpower as an organization is engaging people as they're building. And so they come to us like, okay, well, it's been 5 years, it's been 8 years, it's been 12 years. I've never engaged with the widowed community. I don't know if it's for me. And then they discover, like, all the time, this is what I've been missing. And that's not to say that you can't make it without it. You can. It's just that when you find your people, then suddenly all of the pieces start clicking into place, and you're like, oh, that's that, and this and that. And I was never the only one who felt like this. And so that's our hope, is that no matter when people come to us, so even if you were to hand this to someone and they're like, oh, don't say that word to me, because widow is a loaded word. And a lot of times people don't want anything to do with it. And if it has the word widow on it anywhere, they're like, get that away from me.
Are there alternatives to widow that people use? I mean, labels is such a huge thing.
It really is a huge thing. And I can't tell you how many times I've been asked the question, like, what else can we be called? You know what the truth is? It doesn't matter. Because the problem is that your person's dead. And whatever we call you, you're not going to like it, because it's associated with the fact that your person's dead. And so the way I look at it is, what changed the word widow for me was meeting other widowed people. I've never met a more incredible group of people. And so for me, when I think widow, I have like this collection of incredible people that I think of. And that totally changed the way I look at it. I am a widow. I am a widowed person. I am proud to be in the company of these incredible people. And so my hope is that when people interact with Soaring Spirits, it starts to shift the way they look at that word. Mm-hmm. Because like you said, labels are important. They're a big deal. And also there's nothing that's going to change the fact that your person died. And that's really what you're mad at. That's really what's uncomfortable. So, but I do want to say that you can, yes, come in through the newly widowed packets. They're available for free. They can be requested on our website. Right on the homepage, soaringspirits.org, there's a big button that says request a newly widowed packet. It's one of the first things you'll see on the website. There's two things to know about them. One, we don't send them unsolicited. I always tell people this is like when you turn 50 and AARP sends you your first piece of mail.
Oh, it's before you turn 50.
I was going to say,
okay.
Why do you know I'm turning 50? Why do you know that? And so then you're like horrified because AARP has just sent you something and now you're in that time of life. But it's way worse when you're widowed. You do not want someone sending you a packet that says, hi, I heard you're widowed, because you don't know where it came from. You don't know who knows. Why do they know? Did I fill out a paper that I didn't realize? It can be a really scary, not only can it be scary, but it turns people off from the support that we're trying to offer. So we do not send them unsolicited. That said, if you're a person who wants to get a packet for someone, you order it for yourself. It comes to you, you say, I'm a person who has a friend or a family member. I'd like to provide them this packet. We send it to you, and then you can deliver it to them in whatever way feels right for you. And so the newly widowed packets, again, available for free from our website. Either the person who's widowed or you yourself can order them so that they can be delivered to the person. Inside the packet is a collection of things designed to help them connect with each of our programs that are focused on newly widowed life, including a checklist that is not your normal checklist. It includes things like don't forget that if you turn off your cell phone, their cell phone, you want to maybe save the message Do you want to continue to get the subscriptions from their magazines? Like, these are just things that you wouldn't think to ask, but there are things that as widowed people came to us and we started collecting, gosh, I wish somebody had said that to me. We tried to make a list of those.
Do you include things about social media? Because isn't that such a huge piece now of our lives?
Huge piece now of our lives and how we manage all of those things. So it is always in evolution, this list. And so we're always just trying to be, and we know that we can't possibly provide you with everything, but we just wanted to say, here, think about this, think about this. And that's just one piece of the packet. The other thing I love about the packet is there's a booklet of quotes from other widowed people, and they are designed to just, what we asked the question, what would you like to say to a newly widowed person? And they answered it so beautifully. They come from all walks of life, all different experiences. And one man told me that he got this, when he got the newly widowed packet, he took the booklet out and he put it next to his bed and he read something from it every night before he went to sleep, because it made him feel like he wasn't alone. And so it's one of the most beautiful parts of the packet is just, you open it and it's like your community's in there. And whether or not, and this is, I feel really strongly about this, if somebody never does anything else but that, at least they know where they could go. And that's the biggest piece, right? Is like, where do I go? And you're grieving, so you're tired, you're overwhelmed, you have a million things pulling on you. In addition to that, you miss your person. And so your ability to figure out what to do next is diminished by the amount of energy you have available to support yourself. And if you just know where to find your people, great.
Yeah, in light of that, how do people find you? Do you guys work with hospice organizations, or
we work with hospice organizations? I mean, I will tell you honestly, the biggest piece has been word of mouth for us, but we are in the midst of working to change that because, so yes, we do work with hospice organizations. We're actually right now in the midst of creating relationships with a variety of hospitals to be able to be helping not only to provide these newly widowed packets when they could be given right away. But see, again, that's the trouble, right? Is like in those one moments when they hand you that packet and it says widow and you're like, what? Don't say that word to me. So we're trying to manage that end of helping people get access to the resources. But the biggest piece has been making sure that not only widowed people, but people who are not widowed know about us. And that has continued to, there was a young woman who was in the hospital delivering her first baby. Her husband had died 3 months prior.
Oh,
I know. She was there with her sister. And when the social worker came in and they were expressing, you know, that they wanted to have a picture of him and the poor social worker, her heart is broken. And she had never heard of anyone who was in this situation. So the sister was like, there's got to be something. And so she found Soaring Spirits. So not only was she able to offer that to her sister, but they offered it to the social worker. And so we have worked with therapists, social workers, hospices, bereavement teams at hospitals and in a variety of churches. We are just everywhere we can think of to be able to offer people the opportunity to have access to the resources, not just for them. And this is that's the piece I think that's really made a difference, because there's huge networks around people who do want to support them and they're looking. And so oftentimes they're finding us. So in this, for our conversation here today, for anyone being able to say, look, this is something to look at, to be able to support someone who's just lost a spouse or partner, it's a big deal. And it helps that person feel less helpless, because, when you're watching somebody you love in pain, your heart is just breaking with theirs and you're thinking, how can I help you? And the truth is, in grief, the only thing you really can do is sit by and be ready to hold their hand. But when you are also able to offer them access to a community like ours, it feels great for you too, because you feel like, okay, I've done so. So that sister felt like she had found a pot of gold to give to her sister, because we have a whole community of people who've given birth without their partner who died. And so, just that access. And that's one small example of how being able to be in a community of others makes such a difference.
Sure. So I think, we'll get to you, Jen, in just a second, but let me just get this out before I forget. So obviously, if someone was giving birth, they are probably on the younger side. So that was a question that I had, was just the age range of people that you have in your community. Is it pretty broad, or does it skew more towards the older?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because our average age of service is 47. So if
wow, that's surprising to me.
Age, and 60% or 69% of our community are parenting minor children. So we have a very, very broad, and actually, if we skew anyway, we skew younger. And that's not to say that we do not have resources for people who are older and have lived a longer and fuller life with their person. We absolutely do. But we have just this really broad. So we've had people as young as 18 attend and as old as 89. And so, wow. And that's attending just our in-person events. That doesn't touch all of the virtual events. And we didn't talk much yet about regional social groups, but we also have social groups that meet throughout North America, Ireland, Japan, and the United Emirates, who are holding space for helping widowed people rebuild their social structure. So they do dinners, they do movies, they do go to the beach, they go hiking. Their intention, it's fully peer support, is to come together. They go bowling, to not have to be the third, fifth, seventh wheel in a group. They get to just go and be with their other widowed people.
That's wonderful. Jen, I saw you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, two things come to mind. Well, now three things. One is Abigail, you talked about social media. Listen to me. This I want you to do now, right now. If you have a cell phone, you need to go into the basic settings and assign a legacy contact. I am in a couple of different widows groups, and I almost weekly, somebody gets on and says, my husband died and I don't know the access code to his phone. And each time you put an erroneous access code in, right, you're that much closer to the thing shutting down forever. And you will lose all of the photos and all of the videos at exactly the time that you want them, that you need them. So, and this is for everyone in your family that you know who has a cell phone or a tablet. Just do it. This is it. Just do it now, because that's the only way. And then if you change your access code, right? Something happened and you changed your access code and then you had a bad complication. And guess what? We're without your info. We're without your photos. So do that right now. The second thing is completely unrelated to that. But
no worries.
I did have I also now, since I talked to you last, Abigail, my father died.
Yeah.
And so I have now had the experience. Luckily, my father did not do much with his phone other than say, play games and make phone calls. So there weren't any photos, but I had the experience, right, of putting my birthday in and having it be the wrong, putting my brother's birthday in, having it. I mean, I luckily I knew there was really nothing on there that I wanted. But I could feel what that must be like.
Yeah.
If it was Bob's phone and all of a sudden I didn't have his pictures and I didn't have, I don't know. It is one of the most heartbreaking things that happens. Yeah. The second thing is another heartbreaking thing that happens. And that is, and this, again, extending this access to soaring spirits well beyond MBC or even surviving breast cancer for that matter. And that is, I can tell you that I get this call pretty frequently. Jen, this woman I know at work, her husband died. Could I give her your number? Well, of course you can give her my number, but guess what? She's not going to call me. She doesn't even know me. I mean, it happens all the time. And what it is, it's this great testament to the fact that we want to do something.
Something.
We're desperate to do something to help. And we don't know what it is. So the good news is, I think the alternative to calling your friend Jen O'Brien and saying, can I give her your number? Or can I give him your number? Is to go on soaringspirits.org and request that newly widowed packet and just offer it. Take a look at this. If you have a moment, when you have a moment, I thought this might be helpful. And then the other thing is, don't forget them, right? It goes on for a really long time and people disappear. And invitations stop coming in. At first, everybody's, let's include Jennifer because, and just about the time you're getting ready to actually start accepting some other invitations, they stop coming because, right? Just about the time that you're like, I might actually be able to see some people. Then they forget about you because you're widowed and you're not a couple. And so you don't fit in, which is why those regional groups are so amazing. Yeah, are so helpful.
And it's so important to remember that for those of us in the MBC community, especially if we live a few years with the disease or longer, that our social circles have shrunk quite significantly. And I'm sure, Jen, you remember that from the process of your husband being diagnosed. Your focus becomes very narrow because it has to be, try to stay alive.
Yes.
And so you lose a fair amount of that social circle, and then to lose the person who had been living with the disease, the social circle is already small and then can often get even smaller.
Yeah. So it's a very isolated. I gave a presentation on caregiving not too long ago. And one of the things I talked about was, you're exactly right. In my opinion, and of course, I was the cancer caregiver. So but perhaps the only person who is, people say about how they feel isolated when they get cancer, right? And they do, and they are.
Yeah.
I will submit to you that perhaps the only person who is more isolated is the person who's taking care of the person who has cancer, right? Because periodically people say, I need to check in on Abigail, all of the physicians and the teams focus on Abigail, but nobody focuses on the caregiver.
Right.
And so the caregiver is already quite isolated. And then on top of it, yes, you go from being a caregiver, which is your identity, your raison d'etre, and then all of a sudden the person you're caring for is gone. And so you've also lost a sense of purpose. So yes, it's a very isolating point.
I think
I don't know if Abigail signed off. She doesn't show up anymore, Michelle. I think it's you.
It's just us right now. There she is.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
We're not ready to carry it away.
Yeah. We have a little soft shoe
I'm
thing.
sure you guys could have just fine. Sorry about that. Anyway, I never know what's going on with the internet because my kids play a lot of games. So, but thank you, Jen, for pointing out the isolation that our caregivers experience, far more than sometimes those of us who are patients. Because you're right, there's a lot of focus.
Can I jump in? No, I just wanted to say,
ahead.
That's another reason for the value of these communities, is that when you bring those caregivers together, they have the opportunity to be talking about how their whole, their entire focus, as you said, like they've narrowed their focus to their person and have made their world very small. And so a lot of times their grief is delayed because you're exhausted. You're taking, you're learning to take care of yourself again. You're learning to hear the cues your body's giving you, which you've been ignoring because you've been very focused on someone else's body. And so when those caregivers come together in community, it's a beautiful thing for validation, for inspiration, for, a unique type of support that someone, for example, like myself, I just didn't have that experience until my dad died. And it was such a good, for me as a leader, it was such a good juxtaposition to have lived through both of those things and realize those caregivers are depleted to all, like they're down to nothing. They're on less than fumes. And when they come together and can honor that in each other and hold that for each other, it's a really beautiful space for rebuilding.
So amazing programming, all of these great things. How do you pay for it?
That's a great, excellent question. I will start by saying there is a fee for Camp Widow. It's a conference. So it's basically, I tell people it's a blend between a conference, a retreat, and a high school reunion. And we use all of those elements because to Jen's point, right? You hear it and you think, oh, heck no, I want to go to that. You're going to cry the whole time. That sounds terrible. I've had people ask me if we sing Kumbaya around the campfire. I always tell them I can do it in sign language if that makes it any better. But it is a lot of laughter. It's a lot of joy. There's a lot of coming together in relief. Like, oh, it's okay if I laugh here. Nobody thinks that I'm over it if I am here and joyful. And so Camp Widow is not a sad place. Of course, there are tears. And of course, there are hard things that people work through. And of course, someone who's widowed, 2 months and comes to Camp Widow, they may not even remember Camp Widow, but I will tell you what they will remember. They'll remember being loved. They'll remember being surrounded. They'll remember being understood. And so Camp Widow is it's a unique and beautiful, joyful experience, which is unexpected for people who come. They come on Friday and they're like, what have I done? I don't know about this. And by Sunday, they're like, can we just all live here in this hotel? We're just no one's ever going to leave breakfast. It's always the key on Sunday is how do we get them out of the room because the hotel needs the room back. So there is a joyful element to the Camp Widow experience. So there is a registration fee for that. Every other thing we do to fund our programs is sponsorships and private donations. And by far, so, private donations has been the bigger of those two, but we're working very hard to continue to build a foundation for our fundraising, which will allow us to expand, because that's the answer to your question, right? How do people find you? How can you work with more hospices? How can we make sure that I had someone say, why aren't these in every single life insurance agent's offices from here until eternity? Why are they just giving us, for those of you, for those people who were fortunate to have life insurance and made that plan, they should get a check and they should get support because they know that the check is going to solve some issues, but it isn't going to help them figure out what to do with themselves as they move through. So we're in the midst of that. That's one of the things our board of directors does, helps us raise money to make sure that we can continue not only to offer the programs we offer now, but to expand to make sure that more people have access to this unique form of support that is so beautiful because, the thing is, it's not just for the moment, it's for the future. And people build relationships. I just saw on social media, speaking of, 3 of our widowed people who met at the very first Camp Widow in 2009 are together, and they are celebrating one of the widowed people's daughter is in a ballet. She's gorgeous ballerina. But here's the 3 of them. They met in 2009. They still are together, still supporting each other, still part of each other's ongoing lives. That's what we hope for our people, is that they make lifelong connections that will not only help them make it through whatever challenge they're facing in their widowhood at this moment, but that they'll have that community to count on for all the things that life will bring in the future.
Yeah, you should probably target estate planning attorneys and those judges that are doing probate, right? There's a whole other area. Go ahead, Jen.
I want to work to make those probate courts silent.
Yeah.
I want everybody to do their planning so that there is no probate.
No probate courts. Nothing
wills and yes. But I would like to throw in 2 things because I have a feeling we're going to have to close up here in a minute.
We're winding down, yes.
Yes. So I want to, as the newest member of the Soaring Spirits board, I would like to punctuate Michelle's comments about how these things are free to everything except Camp Widow, and even Camp Widow. If somebody doesn't have childcare and needs to bring their children, those kids are free. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, huge. Okay. So, and as any of you know, right, it is free to the person who needs it, but it's not free to the people who are providing it, to the organization that's providing it. And we did just lose a big sponsor because of our inclusiveness, which is especially painful. So
Wow.
anyone who has connections to corporations or organizations that see a fit here for support, please send them our way, because there couldn't be a greater need, and it couldn't be a more inclusive, supportive organization. And everything, like I said, except the Camp Widow registration, is free to the widowed person. And the last thing, this is again completely unrelated. It's my middle name, completely unrelated, is Michelle started out, Abigail, you asked her the question about how did you get the name, and told the story about the hawk. I would like to suggest that when you are talking with your person, that you talk about how you might communicate with them after you die. I, for one, hear from Bob in a couple of different ways. Birds are one of them, and the other way is tech. He makes his way, and in fact, this entire program, my screen has been flashing, and this is Bob Lemberg cheering me on, to help others in the same situation. But we never did talk about it. And other people who have, I'm sort of I mean, luckily I was pretty open to it, and I figured out, some of the weird things that were happening around the house with the router and all this sort of stuff. I figured out that was Bob. But I encourage you to make a plan. My friend just lost her mother, and she said to her, show me your love in rainbows. And sure enough, she has seen a number of rainbows in places that she doesn't usually see them, since her mom died. So try it. I mean, try it, because there is something really wonderful about getting that little hint. I'm with you. That's all it is. There's a painting in the hallway that Bob keeps tapping so that it's all, it's askew. And I know it's just him going, I'm here, I'm here. So
Kelly Grosslikes, who's been on our show before and talks a lot with people who are grieving, says that she asks every day for a sign in some way that there's something after this life. And because she's looking for it, she gets it. So I think it's important to remember those things, that our person is going to be part of our lives no matter what.
That's right.
They are part of our story. They are part of not just in the past, but going forward as well, because we carry them forward.
Yeah.
And that goes for the person or for friends and family members.
Absolutely. Yes. Like the legacy contact. This is not limited. Yes, exactly.
Well, thank you both so much for being here today. One of the things that I did warn you about was I always ask our panelists to give us a word that they think describes the conversation that we had today, that kind of sums up the conversation. And usually I call on Laura first, but because she's not in our box today, I will share my word first, just to give you guys. Oh, there's Laura.
Yay! Thank goodness.
I'm having like major FOMO, so I had to join.
Do you have a word that describes today, Laura?
Well, when you mentioned that, Jen, I took out my phone immediately to start figuring out the legacy piece. So, what is my word today? Planning. I think you guys gave a lot of great resources for how we can proactively, organize ourselves for the inevitable. So thank you for that.
Wonderful. Yes. Thank you, Laura. How about Jen? How about you? Other than, completely unrelated.
Okay. Completely unrelated. I think I'm going to just offer two. One is community. That's an important one. I think you know that better than anyone. And then of course, Michelle and I know that because of Soaring Spirits, etc. But I just want to slip in legacy contact. Okay. Legacy contact, everyone you know and love, legacy contact.
Well, I was going to say
thank you for that.
So that we are on the same page. I was going to use the word community, but I think that I'm going to change it to love, because every bit of what we've talked about today is about the love we have for the people in our lives, and about how that love will continue to be part of our lives in every way. And when we do things like make our legacy contact, we're doing that because we love the people who we want to have access to everything that we have on this earth. And as we continue together, we continue that love. And I just want to honor that you talked about the person in all your lives who died recently. And actually more than one, right? Your community members who've died. And, they're here with us today because you all love them, and that you're saying their names and continuing that on as a gift, not only to you and all of us together, but to their families.
Thank you for that. I was going back and forth between love and presence.
Oh, okay.
Because I think a lot of what we've talked about today is being present for each other. And for those of us who are doers and want to do something, the concept of holding space, or the concept of bearing witness, or whatever else we want to call that, just being present with people, that can be a really hard thing to learn how to do. And so I'm so grateful to both of you for being here today to talk about that gift that we can give the people that we're going to leave behind, which is an option, a place where they may be able to go at some point in the process, whether that's in the first weeks and months, or if that's even years later, that we can give that gift to each other. We can give that gift to the people who we are leaving behind. So thank you both so much for being here today. Remember, it's soaringspirits.org. And, and it sounds like anybody can go there. Anybody can provide that information to somebody else, pass along the website, share it, write about it, whatever it is that you want to do in order to share this information. And we were talking in the private chat about making sure that we add you guys to our website. We have a page of resources, that sort of thing. So I think that's going to be really important. So thank you both again for being here.
Thank you.
So looking forward, it is 2023, everybody, and we are going to be scheduling these series, these discussions. We're going to be scheduling these as we do here on Sundays at 4 p.m. So if you have a topic that you would like us to tackle, please let us know, because we're wide open for the year and we want to make sure that we are meeting everybody's needs. I did, for those of you in the MBC community, we are going to have an additional legacy workshop in the month of February. So stay tuned for information about that. And this one is going to be, what did you do since you came to the last one? All about preparing and planning, as Jen was talking about, so that planning is done, right? So you can put it in a drawer, it's done. You don't have to think about it anymore. Or since we're at the beginning of the year, thinking about what you're going to be doing this year to add to your legacy. So stay tuned for that information. And of course, there's so much more programming that happens on a weekly basis at SBC. So please check that out. There is a really handy calendar that comes out in the newsletter. So be sure to sign up for that newsletter. And we are so excited that the Spanish speaking portion of the website is being built out. We've got all the programming now in Spanish. And so if you speak Spanish, or you know somebody where that is their heart language, we have all of the supports that we have in English, or most of them, we're getting there, translated into Spanish and specifically targeted for the Spanish speaking community. As well as, what was the other language, Laura? Is it
Oh, William is on a tear. We're going global. It's our focus right now is definitely in Spanish. And we have our art therapy classes in Spanish, our support groups in Spanish, our book club now in Spanish, and more to come. So thank you for that shout out.
I think when we were at San Antonio, we discovered that we had finally gotten to the last few countries to open one of the pages of the website. So very, very exciting that we've definitely gone quite international now. So thank you all again for being here, for listening and participating in this community. And we hope to see you at one of our subsequent webinars.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.